Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy group, and what they're fighting is a fracked gas power plant potential that is not going to go. Right now. So here to talk about it, though, are not necessarily in order of speaking, but in order of what I have written up here. Susan DuBois is a retired state worker and a resident of Albany who is involved in numerous community and political activities, especially in the labor and environmental movements. She is co-chair of the policy committee of the Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy, and henceforth I'll refer to that as SHARE. Merton B. Simpson is Albany County Legislator, District 2. He is co-chair of SHARE. He is involved in numerous community and political activities, especially those regarding social justice, both civil and environmental. He lives mere blocks from the Sheridan Hollow plant, where he fights for his constituents. He is a true handle on making connections between seemingly disparate issues. And Keith Shue is an electrical engineer and the technical advisor for various organizations, including, but not limited to, Otsego 2000, People Not Pipelines, and of course SHARE, of which he is co-chair of the Science Committee. He is a longtime activist on environmental and energy issues and policy, with a focus on the true science in corporate obfuscation. So I guess we're going to Merton first.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy, but we can.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm glad everybody could come out tonight. As you know, we're in the midst of a horrific climate change, and we're here to talk about a local situation that may be able to lead into part of a global solution. I live about 4 blocks from 79 Sheridan Avenue, which is the site of a proposed 16 megawatt fracked natural gas facility proposed by Governor Cuomo. The facility has been in existence since 1911 and has had, various forms of fossil fuels over the years: coal, oil, natural gas. And I don't know if you've been noticing, but there's a lot of propaganda about how pure natural gas is. And natural gas is pure like Nigerian oil is sweet. It's all relative. It's a term of art. But if we know that third-hand smoke is hazardous to your health, what do you think the impact is of a 30-year exposure to the burning of fossil fuels? We have a number of people who live in proximity to the proposed microgrid whose entire families are riddled with cancer. I did a presentation about 2 Sundays ago, and one of the women that we have been working with, Michelle Washington, has cancer. Both her parents and grandparents died from cancer. All of her children have cancer, and that situation is replicated. My wife's sister, we believe, died from multiple myeloma, and her husband died before her for advanced cancer. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. If you're breathing in noxious fumes on a daily basis from a child into adulthood, what that does to your whole developmental system, what that does to your actual gene pool. And people say that 30% of the population, might be exposed to some form of cancer, but when you reach levels of 80 or 90% of people who are proximate, it becomes pretty serious. And the numbers of families who've been exposed are horrific. One of the things that's concerning is last January, with the new election of city council people, the mayor bragged about building a whole series of new houses in proximity to the proposed microgrid. And what's really insidious about that is there was a period from 1981 till 1994 when then Albany Mayor Erastus Corning, who coined himself as an environmentalist, thought that the state of the art was to burn garbage. A week before he had got permission over DEC to open the Answers garbage burning facility, a larger facility had closed in Hempstead. But Corning had so much power and influence over, he and Rockefeller had so much power and influence over the state bureaucracy that they just ran roughshod over everything. And his thesis was, well, we were going to burn the garbage at much higher temperatures than they did in Hempstead, and so it wouldn't be a problem. Well, that theory didn't pan out to be too accurate. And so after years of local people complaining about the horrific health condition challenges that they had, there was a series of burns in which ash actually settled on the front lawn in the snow at the governor's mansion. And it was that existential experience that got him to close the plant. Now, you know, we can't be surprised at the capacity of what people can do when we look at who is our ostensible national leader. Sometimes things go below your worst expectations and beyond your imagination. And I wish I was born 20 years earlier because I could have missed this period, I can tell you that. But we have met with the governor's representatives more than a dozen times now. And we've actually had a sit-down meeting with experts in the field who has demonstrated concretely that there are actually facilities in New York State, be it the Bloomberg Center on Roosevelt Island, like 9 miles from the Statue of Liberty, or the Cornell facility in Ithaca, and several other facilities where geothermal energy has been used to produce non-polluting energy that's cost-effective and is the cutting edge of the new economy. But for some reason, the governor, with lofty goals for renewability, goes one step forward and 3 steps back. So Keith and I were privy to a webcast, and I think Keith actually went to one of the presentations where they have a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation on how to finance fossil fuel microgrids. And although we have presented irrefutably the technology that's available to make the Empire State Plaza a model for renewability, the governor and his people continue to stall and to make excuses about needing to explore alternatives. I had released a press advisory on February 5th, and within about 3 hours of my release of that advisory, the New York Power Authority came out with what appeared to many people to be a victory for us, but what they really said was, well, nebulous things like, well, we're going to do a study, and we're going to put a hold on the project for now. But what we were asking for is a request for proposal from those people who are in the scientific and industrial field who have done successful large-scale geothermal and other renewable energy projects so that they could show us the way forward. What they actually did was what they called a request for proposal was in fact a detailed contract with specifications for a fossil fuel microgrid that, based on the RFP, was taken from the Rikers Island prison. And so in essence, they never really did a legitimate request for proposal. But worse than that, when we first formed in August of last year, they had a series of frequently asked questions in which they went through all the alternatives, wind, solar, geothermal, and claimed that they considered all of those and had tepid rationalizations for why it couldn't happen. Well, we did a request for a proposal, and the response, I'm sorry, Freedom of Information request. I've done 100 of them. And their response was, we have no information that's responsive to this request. So on the one hand, they front end say they seriously looked at the proposal, and we've actually met with some of their representatives that said that they've looked at geothermal options on Long Island. And when we asked for concrete information about what they did, they had to admit that they hadn't looked at it at all. So, I mean, when you look at the horrific Category 4 or 5 hurricanes that we had, the fact that people don't understand that Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands are part of Federal Region 2, which includes New York and New Jersey, and a president who thinks it's okay to throw paper towels at people who are in really, really tragic conditions. We have to look at our governor and understand that basically he's a Republican in sheep's clothing. I mean, if you separate same-sex marriage, the $15 minimum wage, and the so-called, free college tuition, which is a debacle. I mean, since 1949, City University has been turning out outstanding PhDs. I mean, college now is the 13th grade. It's not a big deal to have qualified people in your workforce to move forward. I mean, we're so antiquated that we're dealing with Amtrak, and the Chinese are building bullet trains in Africa. There's something wrong with this picture and this thinking. The very fact that a community from 1911 till today has been exposed to various levels of toxic fumes, and the fact that they're comfortable knowing what the impact is to still come back to those same communities and propose that, well, it's fine for you, when it wasn't okay for the soot to be on the front lawn of the governor's mansion, but it's okay for a whole community to be continually subjected to environmental racism. There's something really wrong with that picture. And my fear right now is that this governor is prepared to possibly stall until the 2020 election. He claims he's not running for president, but I have a sneaking feeling that some of his actions belie that. He may be willing to wait till 2020 and say, well, we've considered all the options, but we're going to go forward with our plan. Now, I really think that might not happen, but our larger goal is not just to stop the implementation of this very bad natural gas plant, but actually to use those funds and other funds to use the 98-acre Empire State Plaza as a model for the state and the nation of what can be renewable energy projects. And Keith is going to go through a lot of the technical information about what's feasible, but it's no longer possible for them to claim they don't know what can be done. And if you look at the governor's track record, his rhetoric and his actual implementation don't match up very well. He's sophisticated enough to try to posture as a populist, but when you look at his economic record, you look at the scandal with SUNY Nanotech, the people that are very close to him who squandered $1 billion, you realize that although he's a smooth talker, he's probably a sociopath, but our president is a psychopath. And the difference, of course, is we have a president who's not in control enough to not speak against his own interests. He has no boundaries. Cuomo, on the other hand, is clever enough and slick enough to try to cover up his disinformation with smooth rhetoric. But you look at the reality, and we're not doing well in New York State at all. I mean, it's one thing to be able to espouse rhetoric against a clear, lunatic like the person who's running the White House, but that doesn't mean that the day-to-day decisions he's making are in the best interest of people in New York. And without giving a political commercial, it's not an exaggeration to say that the statements that Cynthia Nixon makes causes him to react. On April 30th, when we had a major rally that had been planned for over a year in Albany, that was the day that the governor announced his ban on plastic. And there are a lot of other instances where he's in a very reactionary mode. And so we don't need somebody who's going to be reactive and try to pacify us. We need somebody who's going to create a world that our children can live in. You can't just pretend that you can do a geothermal project in one part of the state, but have a proliferation of fossil fuel microgrids, and that's going to somehow even out. You know, this horrific weather that we're having, you know, crazy fires in California. My mother lives in Maryland. Part of Maryland, just a few weeks ago, within 2 hours, had 17 feet of rain. You know, houses were underwater. This trend can't be ignored. You know, the polar ice cap is melting, and the sea level is rising, and there are consequences of that. I mean, if you take New York City out of New York State, you have like Kansas or Iowa. You know, we're a really big agricultural state, and the impact of climate change, not only on our quality of life, but also on our economy, is a question of diminishing returns. So I think that we look for us as a community to band together so that we can create a world that's sustainable. And I think that we're, with enough effort, can definitely stop this bad plant from being in the community. But the larger goal of showing the rest of the nation the right way to move forward with sustainable energy is a goal that we still have to redouble, because hopefully we're not past the tipping point already, but we're clearly dangerously close, and the consequences are unimaginable if we don't stop this trend. So I'll turn it over to Keith.
Okay, thanks everybody. I can't hear anything here. Is that, can you all hear me?
Yeah, you're okay.
Should I hear you? Can you hear me without this?
No, it's better with
Okay, with it.
I think I just wrote this.
All right. The little sleight of hand there is because I detected a typo. That I changed it to. It's 2018. Yeah, it's 2018. That's when this was issued. And like Merck said, we're still waiting for them to say something about what their future plans are. Anyway, I'll get into that. Like Mary said, my name is Keith Shue. I'm an electrical engineer. I've been involved with energy and environmental issues for some time, and it's a pleasure to be here. But so I want to talk a little bit about what this project is that's proposed, and really I want to talk about the solutions, what can be done instead of what they're doing. And Mary said this time I really should be spending most of my time tonight talking about the solutions, which I'm happy to do. That's what I really want to talk about. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. So let me just skip to where I'm at. Okay. So again, that's me, Keith Shue. I guess I'm going to go over here where I can see the screen myself. Well, I guess it could. Oops, what?
It's stuff in the book here.
Oh, it's in. Moved it in. Okay. So, so anyway, like Mert said, the community of Sheridan Hollow in downtown Albany has been exposed to pollution for decades, actually for a century. But the Answers Plan is what you may have read about in papers in the past. It was burning garbage from 1981 to 1994, and it made national news. The environmental racist aspect of it was extremely embarrassing for the governor, and they eventually shut the thing down, like Mert said, when soot was falling on it at the governor's mansion. It should have been shut down long before that. But anyway, the problem that we're talking about here didn't start in 1981. It started actually in 1911. For over 100 years, this community has been exposed to pollution. At the steam plant, which is on Sheridan Hollow, they were burning coal, they were burning oil, now they're burning fracked gas. That's the facility that's been there since way back when. And it's a steam plant, so what it's doing is producing heat that is sent underground to the Empire State Plaza, which is, half a mile away. It's really archaic technology. That's the Empire State Plaza. Like I said, you have the steam plant that's over to I guess the left side of the screen in ways, off the screen. But then the Empire State Plaza is receiving the steam and using it to heat the buildings. It's kind of evolved over time. It was originally going from Sheridan Avenue with the steam tunnel to the state capitol, then they expanded it when they built the Empire State Plaza, and then they added cooling into it too, which also runs off the steam, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, so that's what's been going on for decades, for 100 years. Now the proposal is for a microgrid, which would be adding electricity into the picture. So in addition to the Sheridan Avenue steam plant producing steam, the goal is to fire up the answers plant again. It wouldn't be fired up with garbage, but it would be burning gas in that building and using it to run 2 8-megawatt turbines to produce electricity. And so you have electricity and heat coming into the system here from that facility. So basically what we're talking about is a situation where you have the steam tunnel that's been there forever. On one side of it, you have a community that's been living here. You can see the answers plant, that was burning garbage for a while. It's off now, but so now we're going to add electricity into the picture, firing up the answers plant building again. And so we have now electricity and heat being generated in Sheridan Hollow. The folks here are experiencing the pollution. They're not getting the benefits. Meanwhile, the people who are getting the benefits are the politicians in the cozy offices in the Empire State Plaza. So this is what we call energy segregation. The proposal would burn nearly 50% more gas, more frac gas in Sheridan Hollow than we burn today. Albany would be dependent on fossil fuels for 90% of its electricity and 100% of its heating and cooling. Downtown Albany, the Empire State Plaza. This doesn't make sense. This isn't something that we should be proud of going into the future. The project will perpetuate the disproportionate exposure of an environmental justice community to pollution. Like I said, here's a graph showing that almost 50% more gas would be burned, which translates to almost 50% more CO2 being produced in Sheridan Hollow. So what's there today? Today, you've got, like I said, you've got the steam plant. We also have these nasty old diesel generators that are there for backup, emergency backup for electricity. That's the situation today. What they want to do is modify this picture. They want to replace the diesel generators, which they should do. They should have done that a long time ago. We're saying they shouldn't be delaying that. They should just fix that, deal with that problem right now. But their real goal here is to install this. Two of these things, two of these monsters, 2 8-megawatt, 11,000 horsepower frac gas turbines that would be burning gas all the time. We're not talking about just emergency generation. We're talking about burning gas all the time in Sheridan Hollow to create electricity. That's the problem. And these things are big. You all have heard about mini-sink, the problems with the compressor station there. Well, these type of CHP facilities use the same kind of turbines. In fact, the mini-sink compressor station has 2 6,000 horsepower turbines. This would actually be, 2 6,000 horsepower turbines. This would actually be 2 11,000 horsepower turbines. So this is even bigger, and unlike mini-sink, this isn't in a suburban or rural area. This is in a neighborhood that has a lot of people. So this is a concern. Just for scale, you can see how big the thing is, and that guy looks like he's kind of proud of what he's done there. But we're concerned more about the people who live in the community. These are some of the chemicals that are associated with natural gas combustion and the use of natural gas. Some of this stuff is leaked emissions that occur also through non-combustion. But anyway, you have the BTEX chemicals, benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, xylene. Formaldehyde, that's not good for you. Nitrogen oxides, that in combination with volatile organic compounds can produce down-level ozone, and that's an irritant to your mucous membranes, and that's harmful. Methane. We'll talk about methane. Methane is the main constituent of natural gas, and it's a very potent greenhouse gas. Particulate matter is something we have to be worried about with natural gas. When you see coal burned or fuel oil burned, you get smoke. It's more visible. So people think natural gas is clean. Well, natural gas doesn't have some of the larger particulates, but it does have some very fine particulates, which can get into your respiratory system. It can make its way down through the alveoli line in your lungs and pass between the lung blood boundary and get into your body now. So we're concerned about those fine particulates. But climate change, like I was saying, methane is the main constituent of natural gas, and methane, when it's not burned, if it's leaked into the atmosphere, it's 86, and I've changed that, it's now 96. The numbers keep going up. We now know it's 96 times worse than CO2 in terms of its global warming potential. You only need a little bit of leaked methane to cancel out any benefit that somebody will tell you have by switching to gas combustion. And that's why natural gas is really not a solution, not a vision whatsoever. That's some of the acute health impacts that happen to you. I won't go through them, but none of them are pleasant. That happens when you're exposed maybe for short periods of time to some of the chemicals associated with natural gas. Long-term effects, it can affect every part of your body, all of your nervous system, your endocrine system, your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system. You know, these are some of the things we're worried about. And like I said, this is a community that's not out in a rural area. This isn't a compressor station out in the middle of nowhere. This is a downtown community with lots of people. And it's a community that's growing. There's going to be more people in this area too, so we should be really worried. You know, our view is it's unconscionable to look at the fact that this community has already been polluted for so long. It's unconscionable to view this community's past exposure to pollution as somehow a license for continued lesser standard protection. That's kind of what we think is going on here, the mentality that's at play. That's really offensive. So NIPA will tell you that there's some good things about their project. They'll tell you they'll get rid of the diesel generators, where our position is they should have been that long time ago. Okay. They'll tell you that there's going to be some reduction in pollutant levels for certain compounds. But look at what we're talking about here. We're talking about NOx, CO, carbon monoxide, VOCs being reduced by 20% or so. Now in our view, it's not credible to suggest that the only way of making a nominal reduction like this is by increasing the amount of fuel burned by 50%. That doesn't add up. That you burn more fuel in order to reduce pollution a slight amount. Our view is that we're not looking to achieve a 20% reduction in pollution. We want a 100% reduction in pollution. The community here has suffered long enough. This is not something to be proud of, to reduce pollutant levels by 20%. And I'll also add, we're skeptical of that claim. We have reason to believe that those numbers are not valid either. So anyway, NIPA will say this is a great project because it's a greater efficiency, because instead of burning gas for heat and burning gas for electricity separately, you're doing it together, and that creates efficiency, and that makes it great. Well, they've oversimplified the equation. We know that's not true. It's not true for a lot of different reasons. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I'll just briefly say that we've done the analysis, and maybe this is not accurate. One of the things I will talk about, because I think you guys would be interested in, is what they talk about CHP. You might have heard about combined heat and power. It's something that many folks would tell you is a great thing because it's more efficient to be, instead of burning gas for heat and somewhere else burning gas for electricity, the idea is that you would have combined heat and power. So instead of the exhaust heat which gets lost in the stack, you can use some of that heat, and it's called a CHP facility, where you're now generating heat from the exhaust and you're creating electricity, so that's better than doing it separately. In theory, it sounds good. And in the past, that was a honest improvement. However, this is not the picture today. It's not the picture because that over there is not how we produce electricity anymore. We don't produce electricity through a simple cycle power plant. We don't produce electricity with something that's kind of like a CHP plant already. It has a steam turbine in it, and that steam turbine produces more electricity. So when you're looking at a combined cycle power plant out on the grid, or you're looking at a CHP plant, you're not seeing a great difference in total energy, not a great difference in energy benefit going from one to the other. Electricity today is powered by gas. By and large, out on the grid is coming from combined cycle, which already has made use of the steam turbine cycle. So, we've done the numbers. We can show that their analysis and their comparisons are invalid. I won't go through all this, but essentially we've determined that their efficiency claims, when you do the numbers, it actually goes to about zero. Right? So this is not an improvement.
Some people here might be interested in noticing, just real quick, the one thing that Bethlehem Energy Center produces how much, because that's the one that's just down the road here.
Yeah.
So it's just something I thought people might be good.
Right. Well, actually, that's the one I used for comparison, because it's a combined cycle gas-fired power plant. And that means it's producing electricity in two ways. It's producing electricity with a gas turbine that's generating electricity, but then it's also recovering heat and using that heat to run a steam turbine to produce more electricity. So it is more efficient already. We're not happy about that. I'm not happy about gas in any form. But my point is, when NIPA is trying to make a comparison, saying that they're creating a great improvement by doing CHP, they're referencing it to gas, to electricity that's produced the old way, not combined cycle. So that makes a difference. If you do the numbers correctly, you see that there's a kind of a wash. There's not much of a difference one way or the other. So what does it actually mean? What it actually means is we're just building more power plants. That's what's really going on here.
You're building what?
We're just building more power plants. That's what's really going on here. NIPA would have you think that this is displacing gas as displacing electricity that's produced some other way. No, it's not. In fact, when you look at their RFP, you can find documentation that they're actually boasting about the fact that once they build this, that'll free up more electricity from the grid that's produced by the power plant that's on the grid right now. So this is an adder. This is not a substitute. This is not displacing. This is just adding to the problem. Now I'm going to talk about the good stuff. This is what we want to see. Instead of everything I just said, there is a better way. We can create useful energy, renewables for electricity, wind, water, and sun, and for heating and cooling, instead of burning stuff, instead of combustion, the way things have been doing it for 100 years, let's throw that away. Do something better. Geothermal heating and cooling is the way to go. And there's different versions of this too that I'll mention. Let me talk about the electricity part first. So from an electricity standpoint, we've got to look at what's there today. What's there today is essentially different sources of energy, predominantly fossil fuels. You also have wind. You also have hydropower. You have some solar. These two at the bottom are pretty small. This isn't to scale. If they were to scale, those things would be even smaller than they're shown. But anyway, this is the electricity sources that are feeding into the Empire State Plaza today through transmission lines into a substation, getting to the Empire State Plaza. And you have a dotted line here, meaning that if that stuff goes away, power's lost, you have an emergency diesel generator. That's how it works today. So what NIPA wants to do is this. Well, they want to add into the microgrid, which is this piece over here, they want to add 2 8-megawatt turbines. And these would be burning gas all the time. What they're saying is that 90% of the electricity that the Empire State Plaza uses would no longer be coming from the main grid. It would be generated right there in Sheridan Hollow by burning gas. So think about it. Right now we get about 25% or more of our electricity from hydropower. Well, with this situation, that 25% gets shunted down to 10% of that, so that's like 2.5% hydro that's actually making its way to the Empire State Plaza, because the rest of it is coming from gas burned in Sheridan Hollow. There's something wrong with this picture. Now, and so they call it a microgrid, and we're supposed to think that makes it. Now, this is something that they might do, and something they've hinted at doing, is, well, maybe they could put some solar panels on buildings. That'd be great. You know, we'd love to see some solar panels go on buildings in downtown Albany. One of the things NIPA said early on, when they were poo-pooing the idea of solar and wind and so forth, and they were basically saying, well, you don't have enough room in downtown Albany to put all the solar you need. Well, they're right about that. I'm an electrical engineer, I can't deny the facts. That's true. So now they're kind of talking about, well, maybe we'll put some on some buildings kind of for show. We don't want something for show, we want to see something that's a true renewable commitment. So the solution here is not just to have a few solar panels on buildings downtown that won't add up to much. The solution is something different. It involves not putting those gas-fired turbines in, and instead, something like this. What you're seeing here is our version of the future, where fossil fuel generation goes away. Out on the main grid, we're going to beef up our forms of renewables. So the wind and the solar is bigger. It's good to have solar locally too. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing to have. So let's do that. But instead of that just making up 10% of the picture, let's load up our renewables that we're getting from our electricity that we're getting from renewables that's out on the grid. So what that means is, in terms of Sheridan Hollow, instead of designing a microgrid where the normal status situation is that electricity is produced right there in Sheridan Hollow, instead of doing that, what we're saying is stay connected to the outside grid. There's nothing wrong with that. You're going to have to. You're going to want to have enough renewables to power this monster plaza. You need the electricity that's generated on the grid from our solar arrays, wind arrays that are out in the fields that are not directly in downtown Albany. So remain connected to the outside grid. There's nothing wrong with that. Have some local generation as well. That's good. What about when the power goes out? Well, for short-term purposes, you can have battery storage. If there was a certain amount of local storage, that would get you through short outages. What about longer term? Well, longer term, maybe you do need to have some backup generation. But I want to be very clear about this. That shouldn't only be happening when you're in that rare moment when all of your power is down and you have to use it. During normal operations, we should be getting electricity from renewables out on the grid. Okay? So we're not talking about a microgrid that's producing all of its electricity locally, because you can't further urban area. We have to rely on electricity generation that's out further outside of the urban area from renewables. But then you have emergency backup if necessary. I want to say something about resiliency, because NIPA will tell you that they have to have, that they want to have the turbines installed for resiliency purposes, basically meaning that if an unforeseen event happened and you lost power, you're disconnected from the outside grid, you have those turbines already running, and then you're in good shape. Our view is that's basically a red herring. We appreciate the need for resiliency, but that's what emergency backup is for. Doesn't mean you have to burn gas continuously all the time, just in case the gas goes out, in case the electricity goes out locally. Doesn't mean you have to generate all of your electricity locally from gas all the time. So our view is that the provision of on-site emergency generation should be based on realistic assessments of what you really need. You know, that emergency backup. You know, in our view, if you have an emergency generator that's sitting in the corner and you're never using it, who cares? What matters is if you're turning it on. But let's size that thing to be what you really need. How much do you really need for to get through those times? Do you need all 16 megawatts? Probably not. If you have a crisis that's out there, is the legislature still going to be in session? Probably not. You're going to have some emergency services, so maybe you need some megawatts, but do you need all 16? Probably not. So your backup probably doesn't have to be as big as that. I want to point out that there are actually 4 feeders that deliver electricity right now into downtown Albany. So we already have a pretty resilient system. you know, this is what I want to say here. The microgrid intended for rare emergencies when the grid is down does not require installing equipment that burns fossil fuels continuously for normal operation. That's the real issue here. As proposed by NIPA, we feel that the desire for islanding capability has become a subterfuge for building more baseload capacity for fossil fuels. That's what we're concerned is going on here. So our view is basically, instead of focusing just on the microgrid, let's think about a macro grid that's integrated, that works. You have solar panels locally on buildings, but then you also have larger arrays out in the field. Do this. It's not going to happen overnight. I'm not trying to say we can snap our fingers and do this. But over time, we can build the renewables that we need, relying on our access to the outside grid, as well as local. So let me talk about geothermal, because that's the other piece of this equation. Half of the carbon footprint of the Empire State Plaza is heating and cooling. So if we're just looking at electricity, we're not looking at electricity. Here's some slides that actually, well, here's some information from a fellow that I've got to know by the name of Jay Haig. He's a consultant. He's helped us quite a bit on looking at these issues, and he's kind of pushed the envelope in terms of his involvement and his trying to advocate for the right thing on this. He knows a lot of people all over the country who are experts on how to do geothermal systems, not just for homes. I actually have geothermal in my house. I just installed it just recently, put it on a few days ago actually. But we're talking about large-scale systems. And there's some interesting things that can happen when you do that. First of all, for geothermal, if just so you know what it is, if we're taking the thermal energy out of the ground and using it in buildings, there's something called a coefficient of performance. So let's say you just had an old-fashioned electric heater that uses resistive heating to produce heat. That electric heater is going to have a coefficient of performance of 1. Okay? With geothermal technology, you have a coefficient of performance of like 3 or 4 or 5. That means for every unit of electricity that you have to put into the system, you get 3 or 4 or 5 units of electricity that you're transferring from the ground. So it's hugely efficient. We're not talking about efficiencies of like 80%. We're talking about 300 to 500% efficiency. Geothermal is great in that respect. It works for cooling and it works for heating. You have to have access to an external heat sink or heat source for it to work. There's a compressor involved, so you're relying on the temperature in the ground as a heat sink and heat source where you can produce heat that's actually warmer than what the ground is. You can produce cooling that's cooler than what the ground is because you have a compressor and you have a heat exchanger between the two. So right now, it's an interesting situation in Sheridan Avenue because I mentioned that there's a steam plant to produce heat which goes through a steam tunnel. What they did when they built the Empire State Plaza is they installed these monster things called chillers. Those chillers don't run off of electricity, they actually run off the steam. It's really kind of a strange thing. So you imagine using the mechanical energy of the steam to drive these massive centrifugal chillers. That's what's going on here. And this is old stuff. This stuff was put in the 1950s. This is old technology. That's what they want to keep using. That's the scary thing about this is they're looking at installing a CHP plant that's going to keep us locked into the steam as the basis for the system to operate. We shouldn't be doing that. This needs to be retrofitted, needs to be changed. There are ways of accomplishing that. Interesting. So right now they have 5 chillers, hopefully 500 tons each. One of them, interestingly, is already equipped with an electric motor, so that one could actually be running right now with electricity that you get improvement just by that alone from what Jason has told us. But essentially, what you want to do is you want to replace this with a system where you have electric durable chillers to make this work, and combined with a connection to the outside world, either a heat sink or heat source in the form of air source or ground source or water source heat exchange. So one of those possibilities is a water source heat pump system. My geothermal system has pipes that go deep down the ground to use the thermal energy converted that way. You don't have to do it that way. an interesting idea, I'm not saying this is definitely the way to go, but this is one possibility, is that the Hudson River is right there in Albany. There's potential that the Hudson River can be used for that heat exchange. Okay. So that's a possibility. Like I said, you can also do ground source heat pumps, and you basically have to find an area outside where you can put these ground water wheels in the ground. And then you can have air source heat pumps too. A lot of those are very popular now. They're not quite as efficient as the ground source or the water source, but they work as well. Another neat thing that can be done for large-scale systems is something called thermal advantage load sharing. And I want to say something about this because it's really pretty neat technology. Everything I talked about with geothermal involved heat exchange to the ground or to water or to air. Well, with thermal advantage load sharing, you're actually just circulating heat energy or thermal energy around within the system. And the best example of this is actually, I can think of, is Stanford University. And this is a quote, their system, the Stanford Energy Systems Innovation, what their project did is, this is a quote, SSE represents a transformation of university energy supply from 100% fossil fuel-based combined heat and power plant. That's actually what they had, is that CHP plant, which is interesting what NIPA wants to install. So Stanford had one and they yanked it out and replaced it with what I'm about to talk about here. They replaced it with a more efficient electric heat recovery system. So what they did is they looked at their energy profile over time. And what Stanford found is that when you have a big campus, you have some buildings that are too cold, some buildings are too hot, and they were finding that at any given moment in time, this is the heating and this is the cooling and this is the time scale here. So if you pick any particular day, they were burning gas to produce heat in some buildings at the very same time that they were burning gas to run chillers to produce cold air in other buildings. So this is kind of silly. They're heating some buildings and you're cooling other buildings, all burning fossil fuels to do it. All you really need to do is figure out how do we move the excess heat from the buildings where that have it to the places where you need it. And when they did that, they had redesigned their system. It's called thermal advantage load sharing. That moves the thermal energy around the campus. And they were able to reduce their carbon footprint by 60% just by doing that alone. Okay? That didn't involve any geothermal wells or anything else. That was just moving thermal energy around within the campus itself. So the point is the technology is there. There are ways to do these things. Like Bert said, we had a sit-down meeting with NIPA. Lasted about 6 hours, and we brought experts in from around the country. Jay found them and brought them, and we were trying to talk to NIPA about ways this can be done, how it's been done successfully in other places like in Stanford. You don't have to go all the way to Stanford though to find success stories. St. Patrick's Cathedral here in New York City, massive stone building. How did they do it? Well, they did do it. They basically created a geothermal system that involved drilling down into the ground. And it's working so well that, when they installed it, they also installed some boilers as backup that burn on natural gas if they really needed to. They've never had to turn that on because the geothermal system has worked so well. So, this to me, this is practicing what you preach. We've heard the Pope talk about in his encyclical about protecting God's creation, almost supposed to be a good Catholic, so hopefully he's listening. But really, this is a great example. Other things like Roosevelt Island, which Bert mentioned, is outside of New York City, right next to New York City, Manhattan. And it's a place that's being built totally geothermal for heating and cooling, solar for electricity. Wonderful things can happen when we put our mind to it. But it's not just this. Some of the other places that we gave examples of was Ball State University in Indiana. There's a place in Ohio called Miami. What is it? Miami University. It's not in Miami. It's in Ohio actually. But that's another example of a place where they reformed their entire energy system and got off of fossil fuels. So these things can happen. It can happen at a large scale. It just requires commitment. It requires political will. You know, even other states, Colorado and Oklahoma, they've converted their state capital buildings to geothermal technology. So what do they know that we don't? I mean, if they can take their state capital and get off gas, they had, basically what they had was, you know, burning coal and burning gas. You know, this is the way, it's steam-driven systems before, that's the way these old buildings were designed. They've converted it, they've gone geothermal and it works. Michigan is in the process of doing it as well. So, you know, in our view, that renewables can be done. You know, like I said before, well, 37% of our carbon footprint, I said half of the Empire State Deposit's carbon footprint is coming from heating and cooling. Statewide, 37% of our carbon footprint comes from combustion heating, and that's even higher in metropolitan areas. So, you know, our view is if decision makers conclude, like NIPA has tried to conclude, that it's simply not feasible, it's too much of an inconvenience to heat buildings in a different way, and that we have to continue to burn fossil fuels for heating large buildings. And unfortunately, if that's the decision for Albany, well, you know, then that's going to be the decision in other places too. If we can't do it right here in the state capital, then what are the chances of a place like New York City converting to the renewable systems that we need to have? If we're going to meet our state energy goals, we've got to commit to doing this stuff. So anyway, you know, I want to end it on a positive note. So I want to, you know, I'll point out what Mert said, which is the state did take a break. They have put on hold what their plans are. They say they're researching it. They've had some conversations with us. You know, it could end up with political machinations in the end. But we're still advocating for them to do the right thing. We're kind of in this holding pattern at the moment. But we want more than just talk. We want actually a new feasibility study. We want a request for proposals that involve renewables. I mean, the project that NIPA has put out there came through an RFP process, a request for proposal process that basically was defined from the get-go in terms of exactly what they wanted to have. Like Mert said, they were taking the Riker Island CHP plan, just saying, you know, we're putting this out for bid. How much can you build this for? And he gave us exact specs on the Riker Island proposal. No creativity at all. So we're saying there should be a new request for proposal, a request for proposal that solicits implementation concepts that use the things that we're talking about: geothermal, thermal load sharing, thermal storage, renewable electricity generation, battery storage, all that good stuff. There should be an RFP where we ask the best and brightest minds out there in industry to come back and say, what can you do for us? You know? That's what we think should happen. And that should happen before any contract is awarded. In the meantime, replace those damn diesel generators, because those are bad. we've been saying that all along. Anyway, I guess I'll conclude with a statement that came from one of the many letters that were submitted to the governor on this by Cher. Mert wrote at the end of one of those, for more than a century, the steam tunnel between Sheridan Hollow and the state capitol building in Albany has served as an instrument of segregation, separating those who receive the benefits of energy from those who bear the brunt of pollution caused by its consumption. Rather than perpetuating that injustice with a project that burns even more gas in the community than before, we urge you, this was elected the governor, we urge you, Governor Cuomo, to support a geothermal and renewable energy alternative that demonstrates respect for the residents of Sheridan Hollow and that can serve as a model for the nation.
Yes. I'm going to talk just briefly about one aspect of the work that Cher has been doing, which Merton and I think Keith may have mentioned a bit, but it has to do with our efforts to get information out of the state about what they're doing and what they're proposing, which has not been all that easy. And how many of you here are familiar with the Freedom of Information Law?
Has anybody here ever made a FOIL request? Okay, good. All right, we have some people who know this thing. The Freedom of Information Law is the state level access to records law, kind of parallel to the federal Freedom of Information Act. And it allows any members of the public to request from state or local agencies records that those agencies might have in their possession. And records is defined pretty broadly to include letters, reports, data, computer-based data, and so forth. The way the process works is you write a letter to the agency who you think has information or records. It's not actually information. You can't just pose them a question and say, tell us the answer to this. You have to say, I would like to review any records you have on the request for proposal for the Sheridan Avenue steam plant, for example, or the Sheridan Hollow project that's pending here. And then the agency is supposed to review the records and provide you access to them. There are some exceptions they can cite. They're listed in the Freedom of Information Law. They can withhold records if they are things that would be an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, or that would jeopardize a law enforcement investigation. There's a number of listed specific exceptions, but if the records don't fall within those exceptions, they have to hand them over. They can charge you an amount for copying, but nowadays so many things are on electronic copy that they just email them anyhow. It's not a 25 cents per page for copying on a lot of the information that's out there. If the agency withholds documents, they're supposed to tell you specifically why, with reference to those exceptions for FOIL. And if you disagree with their decision on withholding the records, or if they have failed to respond altogether, you can appeal to the appeals officer for the particular agency, who's frequently a general counsel or someone like that, and say we're appealing the denial of access to the records. So Sheridan has made quite a bit of use of that process to try to get information from primarily the New York Power Authority, NYPA. And I'll go through a couple of them just to give you a flavor of what happened. Back in, I think it was probably September of 2017, there was a meeting in which some Sheridan people participated and some NYPA people, and the NYPA representatives were making some statements, and there was a wish on the part of the people from Sheridan to get the basis for those statements, like, where's your information that supports what you're saying? So there was a follow-up letter for some of this. I think it had to do with fuel consumption at the existing plant and so forth. We also decided to do that not just as a kind of thank you for meeting with us, we'd like to get the following documentation to follow up on what you said, but also as a FOIL request. That took a really long time to get a response to, and eventually part of that response was just sort of a, well, it's in that other document we gave you after another FOIL request. The other document was about 2,000 pages. It was kind of like, it's in there, you find it. They did provide a few records. There were also some things they said they didn't have any records on that one. One of the big efforts we made was to get the request for proposals. And that was a document that turned out to be very valuable, because once we had it, it did have a lot of information in it that Keith and others in the science committee have gone through in considerable detail. It really provided a lot of information to us as to what they're proposing, how it compares to other projects and so forth. But NYPA was trying to withhold that on the basis that it was under a so-called restricted period, which I feel is probably a kind of a misapplication of some other restriction that exists about talking with the, bidders talking with the agency other than talking with the designated person during the time that there's a request for proposals or an invitation to bid out or something like that. So we wound up having to, in order to get the RFP, we wound up having to make a FOIL request, go to the Committee on Open Government, which is the committee, you probably heard of Bob Freeman, who's the director of that. He's quoted frequently in the press. We had to go to the Committee on Open Government to get an advisory opinion from them. And then we had to make an appeal to to NYPA based on their lack of a response, and we put out a press release. And after all that happened, then they released the RFP, which they put up on their website. It's up there now for anyone to see. The other one, Merton mentioned this one. NYPA had made a lot of statements about various alternatives being not feasible. And so we made a request that was, we'd like to access any records you have that indicate your analyses of these alternatives, whether it's geothermal or thermal load sharing or whatever. And the response that we got back was, we don't have any such records. So that to me was very surprising, because I thought they probably would at least have some internal memos, and they would say, well, it's intra-agency things that weren't final, and those are accepted for FOIL, so we really can't give them to you. They didn't even say that. They just said, we have no records.
And the interesting thing about that is they said that after they made statements publicly, that they already looked into it and the solar and the wind don't work.
Yeah, exactly. And those statements about the solar and the wind not working were what we wanted to test by saying, okay, let's see your calculations, let's see what you were assuming, were you assuming the right things and so forth. We never even got to that, because they said they had no records. So, that's the type of thing that we've been involved in. But, to me, it highlights a couple of things. One is that the Freedom of Information Law, it's kind of ponderous, it can be sort of slow, but it's a really valuable law. And any of you who've used it probably may have had a experience of the same thing. The other thing is, just how unwilling the agencies involved in this and the governor's office have been to respond substantively to members of the public who are really trying to engage in a rational discussion of this and to provide information and so forth. There are other ways in which we've failed to get a response. Like back in February, when NYPA put the project on hold and said they wanted to look into it some more and so forth, they were talking about getting input and so forth. And this wasn't in their press release. I think it was probably something that was quoted by a reporter talking with one of their representatives, something about having listening sessions. So we said, listening sessions. I mean, it sounds like they're going to have public meetings or something like that, or open a comment period. So we wrote a letter saying, we think these are some suggestions as to how you should proceed if you're going to have this public input thing. We never got a response to that. They haven't done any type of a process of that nature. They met with the experts who Keith and Merton and J.A. convened, but that meeting was at the request of Share. And we're not aware, as far as I know, of any other meetings like that that have occurred.
They told us even at that time that that was the first technical type of meeting they've had.
Yeah. And I think the last thing I'd like to mention is something that is really kind of a very big picture type of thing, even beyond the Empire State Plaza, and it's at the level of suspicion. And I won't mention who put out this idea, but I'm just going to say that to me, in some ways, it makes sense. I think it's the thing to kind of keep in mind in terms of looking at natural gas infrastructure in the state of New York, which is that even though the Cuomo administration decided not to approve hydrofracking in the state of New York, they may be willing to approve a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure, but natural gas infrastructure specifically, with the idea that somewhere down the line, Pennsylvania will have used up a lot of its natural gas, the price of natural gas will go up, and then New York State may say, well, we're going to allow fracking after all, when there's more money to be made within the state. Now that's I don't know if that's a conspiracy theory, I don't know if that's a political scenario or what it is, but it's something that to me adds up enough that I'm going to kind of keep an eye out for that sort of thing over the next 5-10 year time period. But I just want to throw that out there to kind of as food for thought or observation, I guess, is the only thing on that one. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. I don't know, we want to have a question and answer now?
Yeah, we got lots of time for question and answer. We have to be out of here by 9, so let's say we have to be out of here by 8:55. That way we'll be out of here by 9.
Can I have
We've got over half an hour, so. Yeah.
one or two more things in terms of, in case anyone has to leave, of what one can do in reaction to this situation. One is that what Mary mentioned, the September 8th Rise for Climate Action. There's going to be a rally at 11 o'clock in the morning on September 8th, which is this coming Saturday, at the Governor's Mansion. And that's part of a nationwide climate action day. The other thing is that on September 11th, some people from SHARE are going to be delivering petitions to the governor's office. We're going to meet at 11:45 at the State Street entrance to the Capitol and deliver the petitions to the governor's office, and then probably go down the hill to the New York Power Authority office on South Pearl Street, and deliver them there too.
So other people will able to come to that?
Yeah, if somebody wanted to. And then the
40 North Pearl.
Yeah. The last thing is there is a petition, it's on the SHARE webpage, which is sharealbany, all one word, .org.
Well, it's also on the table right back there.
Oh, good, okay. And you have other things back there, informational flyers and stuff?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that too. There's a bunch of stuff at the back there. You can see things that we've written to the governor. In fact, the big analysis that we were talking about that we provided to really expose the problems with what Mike has been saying, that was delivered on February 5th or 6th? February 6th. Yeah, and so we had a press release associated with that, which you can find back there. In the document itself, it's actually 25 pages. I only have about 3 copies of that. You're welcome to have it if you'd like. But there's summary information as well about some of the issues related to this too. So we have that. And the petition, sign the petition.
Yeah, and if anyone feels really inspired to do some writing, it would be great if you could write a letter to the governor and say you're concerned about the proposal for a basically antiquated type of way of heating and cooling the power in the Empire State Plaza, and that you think the state should issue a request for proposals for use of renewables at the Empire State Plaza. That's one of the key asks here.
Got a question over here?
Just, they can, that's not.
I don't know if we're going to need.
No, just.
I can object it. I think I've had 30 years in the state, and I think what we're in for here is a very long haul. I think we're going to need to rally our strength, because getting something to change in the state is like pouring molasses in January. So I think we gotta, keep, this is something you have to keep at. I heard initially, well, they used the excuse that they couldn't have everything all solar and all renewable, so they're not gonna do any. That was I went to a very early meeting on this, and they acted like, well, if we can't do it all that way, we're just gonna forget it. But now those diesel, those generator things that they have now, I understand that they said at that time, somebody said they ran those all day because they had one person who had to go around to all these different places and check the functioning. And that's the reason it had to be run so long. And somebody lives right near that. And is that have we had any impact on that issue?
Yeah, and I guess you want to talk about that too, Susan. But diesel generators, that's what they look like right now. Ostensibly, these things are only supposed to be running when there's an emergency. Okay, it's just emergency.
But they checked them. They checked them.
They check them.
Some.
They check them a whole lot more than they need to, and they run it for a much longer period of time, much longer window than they need to.
Right.
Everything about this is bad. First of all, they should never have installed these old diesel generators the way they did. Look at where this is. This is right at ground level. I mean, this is actually lower than ground level. I took this picture
And they're noisy.
from a hill. Well, they're noisy, and they're right in your face. I mean, this is the thing. They've installed an industrial operation right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's not unusual for you to have backup emergency generators for big buildings. There's nothing unusual about that. What's unusual about it is they stuck it right outside the window of folks who live in Sheridan Hollow.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And they have to maintain these things. These things are old. They should have gotten rid of them a long time ago. They shouldn't be coming out of ground level. And if you have more modern equipment, you don't need to test them that often.
and run it for that long periods of time. You can change your management process so that you can do it more efficiently. You know, our view is that the emergency generators, if you need them, they should be just there for emergencies. And under normal operation, we shouldn't be burning stuff for electricity.
Another question, the geothermal, where were you going to put, where's the proposal, where to put the?
Where do you
The well.
put
The well
Well,
for
there are different ways of
geothermal?
doing it. You can have ground source wells, in which case you need to find areas to do that. One possibility I've thought about is, how about underneath the parking garage itself? I mean, you can go straight down from there. That's one of the things I've wondered about. But, you know, there may be other sites around the downtown area. But the Hudson River is really an interesting idea, because
That's not as efficient as the ground, though, is it?
no, the water is efficient. Water is efficient. I would say it's probably
The
on par.
temperature stays constant enough that,
It depends. It depends. You know, people have complained that water can freeze. There's actually technology to address that. In fact, one of the pictures I showed had lake plate exchangers actually, which operate even when it's cold outside. It sounds like magic that you're getting heat energy from when it's cold outside, but it works. It's like an air conditioner in reverse. You know, it's where's the cold air coming from? In your house when you turn an air conditioner?
well, it's like,
It's the heat
say a
being pulled
refrigerator.
out.
You know, I mean, you turn
Right.
it one way for this winter and some one way for
Right.
the summer.
Right. So that.
Analogy.
Yeah, and the neat thing about it is they work better if we have large-scale systems. Because then you can do things like thermal load sharing, where you're moving thermal energy around within the system itself. So you actually have the ability to do something that's even far more efficient than in a geothermal that I might have on my house.
In the winter, though, what do you do for the extra electricity that's needed for geothermal? How do you explain that? Because the solar is not as effective in the wintertime to produce electricity to operate, and geothermal requires more electricity.
Geothermal requires more electricity, that's true.
So-
But what we're saying is for the electricity needs of the Empire State Plaza, which would include the electricity needs of the geothermal system. Remember, though, you had that coefficient of performance, so you get a whole lot more thermal energy out compared to the electricity. But having said that, you're right, you need electricity. Like I was saying before, our position is that instead of kind of falling into this paradigm that NYPA has tried to create for us, where they say, well, we should be producing all of our electricity locally, which means burning gas. Instead of doing that, let's remain connected to the outside grid. NYPA is correct when they say you can't shove all the solar panels you need to power a big thing like this downtown. They're right about that.
But even in the Northeast,
But the point is, as long as you're connected to the outside grid, you have the whole rest of the world where you can be installing large-scale solar arrays and wind turbines and hydropower. You can stay connected to the outside grid and you load up the external grid. If you green the external grid, then you can provide enough electricity. So that's what we're saying, is install solar panels where you can on buildings downtown, but also green the external grid.
community solar.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's just a fact of reality that in an urban area, I mean, I can put solar panels on my roof, which would be enough to power up my house. For single-family residential, you can do that if you design your house right. For an urban area where you have large buildings and many people living in them, you can't get all the renewables, you know, on the building itself. You're going to have to rely on larger arrays that are more in the outskirts of the urban area to feed that. Okay, that's just the reality of the energy demands that are associated with the city. That's going to be true of any city. So if we want to go renewables and we're living in cities, that means we're going to have larger solar arrays and wind turbines and so forth that are out in the rural areas. It's just the way it goes. You know, renewables have a low energy density. It's just the way it goes. You know, we have to. You know, one of the things sometimes we get into, something that I'm kind of frustrated by sometimes is you have folks who are environmental advocates who don't want fracking. if you want to do it renewables, if you want to go with renewables, if you don't want fossil fuels, then you're going to have to be willing to see some of these things, see the solar panels and the wind turbines. You know, you can't be against all of that.
But the other thing too is that the existing steam plant is fueled by frack gas that's piped in from Pennsylvania. So, I mean, the whole notion that you have to do something locally is
Absolutely.
absurd.
Right.
The plug into the macro grid is what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, for doing things, for heating and cooling and powering things through renewables, that has to be coupled with reducing the demand for the energy also. And,
Efficiency.
yeah, and it also has, because of the intermittence of some of the renewables, there also has to be storage into it. It's a whole, it's a whole piece of a puzzle. But if you had the thermal load sharing, which Keith described, you know, reducing the energy demand significantly, and then the heating and cooling that you did need to do being done through the geothermal type of a process, which is substantially more efficient than the you know, the existing process, or just, you know, electric heating or something like that. The amount of energy you need to be getting from the renewables would be really much smaller than what you have to visit the usual plaza.
Following up on that, relative to the proposed 16 megawatts, what is the current load from the existing grid?
What they're claiming is that the two 8-megawatt turbines would, running all the time, would be able to provide 90% of the electricity in Empire State Plaza. So basically, it's that amount. And I mean, the real question you want to know is how many megawatt hours of energy over time as we go down. And I can dig up that number. But the point is that they've sized it so that the plaza would be relying on those two turbines for 90% of the electricity needs of the plaza.
And right now, the outside grid provides
All of it.
all of it.
Yeah.
So it provides the almost 60 megawatts for
Yeah.
our,
That's correct.
so the proposed project will not add any new load, other buildings, et cetera, in downtown?
Well, you know, I don't want to oversimplify it. They have like a phase 1 and a phase 2. Their current proposal is to power the Empire State Plaza and the Capitol, and in their future phases would include some other buildings in the downtown area that they would add to it as well. So, you know, I'm worried that they're going to be throwing more turbines in there too.
So I'm a little confused if they're wrong, if they already meet 100% of their needs, why do they even need this microgrid at all?
My theory is that they're by hook or crook, they're trying to find ways to add more generation capacity from fossil fuels, from gas. You know, they would describe this as a resiliency benefit, meaning that the great thing about this is if the outside power goes down, you have those two turbines that are already running, and you can let the whole place be an emergency shelter. That's kind of what they're saying. That's how they're selling this. But the you know the reality is that's why you have backup generators. The idea that you need to be burning gas in Sheridan Hollow all the time in case the power goes out, that's just kind of dumb. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Does the Times Union Center, is that connected with the plaza, or is that a separate?
It's separate, it's separate, but
separate. It's
it
part of
might be
phase 2.
included in phase 2 according to their plan, which we think will never happen. Phase
You
2.
don't want phase 1 or
Yeah,
phase 2?
No,
there's
we
other
don't.
buildings, there's other buildings that they might tie in eventually that,
One 12
City
State
Hall,
Street,
and I
City
think
Hall.
the county office building.
There's a
some
cluster
others.
of buildings that were shown in that. The old steam plant also used to power the whole education building, which is a huge, you know, Romanesque kind of structure.
Yeah, so basically, the phase 1 that they're talking about would be the Empire State Plaza, which are these buildings here in the orange, and staked out. This would be powered by the CHP plant.
steam and now also for electricity. For phase two that they're talking about, we pick up these other things like the timekeeping center, city hall, courthouse, and other things.
So Joe had a question.
Yeah, it's not specific to the plaza area, but you mentioned you have geothermal in your house, and of course, against all fossil fuels.
As of about a week ago.
But it seems to me that to ask people to do individual solutions like that is very difficult and maybe expensive, especially for people that might be living paycheck to paycheck. Now, when I was in Russia not too long ago, they have a different method by which they heat houses. They don't have everybody have their own furnace in their house. They have centralized heating, and when you build a house, you hook up to the pipes, and you pay like you pay your electricity. And they claim, even though I know you lose something when you transmit any energy, whether it's electricity or steam or heat, that it's much more efficient because of efficiency of scale, and also because so many individual furnaces in people's houses are running very inefficiently, and that they pollute less, even though they use fossil fuels, because they're a big fossil fuel country, and that they believe that that centralizing of the heating would be better. And if we were going to go to geothermal, like you mentioned, there is the economy of scale that you said, I would think. Would that not be a better way to do some of that, to do the heating?
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of the whole idea of the thermal load sharing I was talking about is where you are looking collectively at a campus or, you know, large institution or something, maybe a neighborhood, and you're moving thermal energy around that way. So yes, you know, for them to say that they're doing it efficiently with steam, that's kind of hard to believe, because steam is the old-fashioned way of doing it.
I don't know if it's steam.
The way to do it now is, okay, maybe I misunderstood. I thought you said it was with steam. But the way to do it, like they did at Stanford and at Ball State University and other places, is there's a warm water loop and a cold water loop that's circulated around all the buildings, and there's a heat exchanger between the two of them. That's what moderates the temperature, basically moving the thermal energy from where you have it to where you need it, and then supplementing it with geothermal if need be. So, but it involves usually a warm water loop and a cold water loop as opposed to steam.
Do you save or lose money with using your thermal by doing geothermal in your house?
Well, over time, I'll save a lot. You know, it's an investment. I mean, you're right that geothermal is expensive. I mean, I did it because I felt it was something I should do. Not everybody can afford geothermal, even though there are incentives and they're pretty good incentives, at least right now. Okay, but it can still be expensive. I did get the federal incentive and the state incentive, so my cost was substantially less than otherwise. But you know, not everybody can afford that, like you said. Another way to go is with air source heat pumps, and you see a lot of them around now. There's the kind of Mitsubishi units, and I don't know why they don't have an American made one, but they have Fujitsu and Mitsubishi units that you see outside the buildings. It looks kind of like an air conditioning system, but there's a piece of it that's in your house. It's kind of midway up the wall, and then there's the loop that goes to the outside unit that's outside. But those are being used a lot now in commercial installations and for residential, and that's quite affordable.
Question over there.
Yeah, for one thing, I did just put in last December an air source heat pump.
How's it
And
working?
It's good, it's good. We have it's a big room and then rooms around the edge that sort of keep on the old furnace, but.
Okay, so you have that unit that's kind of like.
Yeah,
halfway up the
exactly,
wall?
small one up in
Yeah.
between some windows and stuff, and it's nice, yeah. It blows nice warm air and you stand there and go, warm. I also just put out a second set of solar panels to sort of cover that. My question to you has to do with the hydropower. Are there a lot of options, still a lot of more options for dams and stuff? Or
For expanding hydropower?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I mean,
kinda
well, I mean, there's
thought-
some though, there's some though.
There's
I mean,
some.
I mean, the thing is, along the Mohawk River and other places, that there historically, there have been small
Sure.
impoundments that were producing electricity, actually. I think
Right.
there's some opportunity to enhance those and bring some of those work, bring them up again. I mean, I don't think I would be advocating for, you know, damming up a new river and destroying an ecosystem, but if the dam's already there, you might as well use it, and you might as well install newer turbines to get more efficient
I think that
electricity
the Mohawk,
generation.
the Mohawk tends to use what's flowing, and it doesn't really dam it, it just, but then you lose, you have to put in the side, the bypass for boats that want to. But, yeah, I just wondered if, I mean, yeah, no,
We need more Niagara Falls.
There's,
But-
there's pros and cons with the hydropower, and, you know, one of the concerns is the mega projects up in Labrador and up in Canada and so forth, that they basically dam up a river, flood a huge area.
Right.
And those, you know, displace the people who live there, and, you know, actually produce methane as the materials that were, you know, the plants and so forth that were flooded break down. So those have significant problems, but yeah, I don't know any in terms of numbers about how much you know, lower impact hydro could be expanded in New York State. But it's a good question.
There's some modest amount of new hydro that could come online. I think in Jacob's study, it kind of touched upon that a little bit.
waiting for them to put turbines in the river.
Well,
Turbines,
that's
I mean, that'd be
another way
pretty
to
cool,
do
just
it.
use the flow and push it.
That's another way. They've
Yeah.
experimented with that on the Hudson River.
Yeah,
Down near New York City.
yeah.
Yeah, there's those things that are there too. I mean, to go renewable, I think if we're gonna go large-scale renewable into the future, and that's gonna make up a large percentage of our energy in the future, it's gonna be predominantly wind and solar,
But there's also the offshore wind, how's that going, how's that?
in addition to existing hydro.
Yeah, offshore wind,
That's,
that's,
there's potential.
that's a
there.
big thing.
You know, you know, I hate to use this phrase, all of the above, because I know that sounds
Yeah.
terrible, but when it comes to renewables, I'm in favor of all of the above. We're gonna have to have offshore wind turbines, we're gonna have to have onshore wind turbines too.
Yeah, you know, the thing is, to have the type of society we have with, you know, the type of climate control we have inside buildings and lights and transportation and so forth, you have to get the energy from somewhere. And some of those things have more impacts than others, but they all have at least some impact. And, you know, so you have to look at, you know, where's the trade-off? How much can you reduce the demand so that you don't have to have those trade-offs as much? And, you know, some of that's involved with a technological reduction in demand. Some of it's also cultural in terms of how people decide to, you know, run their lives, how big a house do they want, things of that nature. And, you know, how some of these things are done is another question in terms of how good or bad they are in terms of their impacts. I remember quite a few years ago now, probably over 10 years ago, I heard a presentation by a person from the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, who was talking about land-based wind turbines, and those turbines that are built specifically on farms, and the types of considerations that he was recommending be taken into account so that you minimize the adverse effects on the ability of the farmer to use the land that, you know, he's rented out for some turbines. And there are a lot of things that have to be taken into account, and, you know, depending on how you did that, you could either have something that was really, you know, created some problems, or something that was really, you know, pretty beneficial because now the farm owner was getting some type of rent from having the turbines there, but had not been, his farmland had not been adversely affected other than maybe like an access road or something like that. So how you do it is important, you know, how much you really need is important. And there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, and I'm of the opinion that we need to really be pushing for renewables here in New York State itself. You know, the quick fix that Coma's relied upon recently is bringing hydro in from Canada. You know, you can only go so far with that, and that's at the sacrifice of an ecosystem that's out there to do that. So, you know, I think we've got to bite the bullet and install the stuff near us.
Okay, okay.
For the video, everybody can hear.
Oh, I hadn't thought about the video, yeah. Okay.
What is causing all the resistance to go into more renewable energy and at least looking at options?
ExxonMobil.
Greed.
I think
They all-
well, I think there's, yes, and I think there's apprehension, well, it's on both ends, I think. There's certainly, there is a lack of political will to do the right thing. We are talking about investment, which means some upfront money that's got to be spent to deploy these things. There also has to be willingness on the public level to see these things. I mean, a friend of mine, Tony Graffi, I don't know if you know who that is, he's a scientist in Ithaca, who's written a lot and talked a lot about energy. You know, he shared his frustration with me about what happens near where he's at, and I've seen it happen where I'm at in Otsego County. Some of the same folks who are against fracking, they don't want to see wind turbines either. They don't want to see solar panels either. Well, it's gonna, you have to give somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
So.
They want to go to heaven, but they don't want to die.
Well, we should also say something else, because we're an anti-war organization, and that the wars are fossil fuel wars. They're
Yeah.
trying to make as much profit as they can while they still can, while they're still fossil fuels. So we go to Iraq and we go to other countries, or want to do pipelines through the countries, and we're now keeping down the gas price because we want to hurt Russia, and we want to hurt Iran, and we want to hurt Venezuela.
We also had a glut.
And, you know, so there's a lot of other not monetary costs to keeping fossil fuels that are, you know, changing the world in very bad ways.
I guess you've all heard of, or maybe you've heard of this concept called the social cost of carbon, where you evaluate how much each ton of carbon is costing in terms of the harm on society. And there are different numbers that have been assigned to it, like $40 a ton. So basically, you can kind of estimate what the burden on society over a continual burning of fossil fuel is when you look at the social cost of carbon, and it ends up being millions or billions of dollars. That these are externalized costs that society is paying to clean up the mess, to deal with climate change, to deal with the flooding, to deal with the healthcare and all the other aspects of our continued addiction to fossil fuels. If we can somehow recapture some of those externalized costs that the companies don't pay for, that the oil and gas companies don't pay for, then we'd be better off, whether it's a carbon tax or some other type of methodology to properly put the cost on fossil fuels at the source.
We are also blind to the subsidy that our taxes are paying the fossil fuel industry. If we were paying for gasoline for our cars, unsubsidized, we would not be driving so much. Like Europe, I mean, they're paying so much more than we pay, but we are really paying, but it's hidden to us.
I agree with you. I mean, I kind of take a contrary view to some folks who think we need to keep the cost of energy down. Maybe the answer is to let it be expensive. We'll use less of it.
Yeah.
Some people can't pay for it. Some people already can't pay for their heating.
Right.
The poor would need to get it.
Yeah, and we pay 60 cents out of every tax dollar to go to war anyway.
Imagine, I mean, it's funny when people talk about, like, well, Denmark, look at what they've done with their offshore wind and how much they're investing in it, though. You know, they're not spending half of their GNP on wars overseas. They're building wind turbines out there, and they're generating their electricity from renewables. I agree with you.
Yeah, one other thing that is a piece of the puzzle on the, the system-wide or statewide type of a level is the question of the intermittent nature of some of the alternatives, particularly wind and solar. And it's my understanding that Germany ran into some problems with that because they went way ahead. They got ahead of themselves building the wind up but not enough of the storage. And now they're putting a big emphasis on storage. I asked a question about that actually, not specifically that, but about what's happening with regard to storage in New York. At a meeting that Merton was one of the panelists at a month or two ago, and the person who was speaking there said that New York State actually is doing some things to start developing electricity storage in the overall grid. So it's another piece of it that has to be considered. And I was glad to hear that New York is one of relatively few states, the speaker said, who are actually starting to do something concrete on that. So,
Storage is, I'm an electrical engineer, so it's hard for me not to jump in when I talk about this. But yes, storage is an issue because of the intermittency. As you get a greater percentage of your electricity from renewables, intermittent renewables like wind and solar, it becomes tougher because you need the storage. For New York, we have about 25% of our electricity from hydropower, which is actually quite a lot. That's actually a lot. We're already ahead of the game in that respect in terms of lower carbon footprints. To get so if we want to get to 50% renewables, and by the way, hydropower is kind of the closest thing to base load for renewables you can get to. It's because you can run it all the time, as opposed to wind and solar, which you can't. So what ends up happening is as you have a certain percentage of your electricity coming from renewables and the rest of it from gas, you can turn off the gas and run the wind and solar, and when you don't have wind and solar, you can turn on the gas. When you now take the gas out of the picture and you're getting more and more of your percentage of renewables, storage becomes a real issue, because that's the way to deal with that. So, but it's doable. It costs more as you move up that ladder of the percentage of renewables you want.
Isn't the Gilboa Dam a storage facility to try to hold water and release it for a generation when there's peak load needs? And I think they moderate Niagara Falls to some extent by holding, letting the water run when it's for tourists, but then let more water go through the generators at night when nobody sees it.
By virtue of a dam, by definition, it's a storage facility. So you're right. And there's something also called pump storage, where basically, if you're producing electricity at a cheap rate at certain times of the day, where you have excess electricity, you must use that electricity to pump the water back uphill, and then you can use it later. So there's storage kind of built into hydro, which is good for New York. I mean, that is going to make it a little easier for New York than other states.
Is anybody thinking they can get enough lithium out of the mountains of Afghanistan to make a big battery? That is kind of a crazy idea, really. There is a large amount of lithium deposits in a couple of places, South America and Afghanistan, which could be a new cause for wars. Resource stuff.
Now that'll be in Africa.
Oh, African? Oh, that's another whole.
Well, the Congo,
yeah. So that's kind of in the picture.
Have you ever gotten any feedback from NYSERDA, understanding that it's a state/Cuomo authority? But have you approached them and say, what's wrong with our idea?
Yeah, we actually met with Alicia Barton, who's the head of NYSERDA. We had a sit-down meeting with her for about an hour, and we went through some of these things, and we talked about it. And then they went away. so we're still waiting to see what happens next.
Actually, the same day we met with her, the same day that we did the April, earlier in April, we had a New York Geo Conference. Alicia Barton had a Rockefeller Institute presentation that talked about major investment, at the $1 billion range in unions in terms of renewables, mostly wind and solar, but there's a lot of talk about what could be done, but not a lot of action backing it up.
And unfortunately, like Merton said before,
while NYSERDA is promoting solar on one hand, they're also still promoting gas over here too. And their conventional microgrids that they're proposing are all gas, they all have turbines at their core, almost all.
One step forward and 3 steps back. That's the problem.
Does anybody have any more questions? We have petitions to sign, we have paperwork, we have a good 6 minutes. You can meander your way out of here.
We
So
need to
thank
be
you.
out by 5.
So we need to be out by
Yeah, we need to be out
5. So you've
by
got
5.
like 4 minutes to,
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Don't forget to vote.
Yeah, really.